Terrific. I just want to say hello again. This is Meredith Ferris, and I'm the facilitator today for the Tu-Soma Early Grade Reading Case Study webinar. We're delighted to have you all online. So I see, Jane, that you've joined us. We're so glad to have you with us, and a few folks who are on the phone line, and so we appreciate that you all are dialed in as well. If you're dialed in but not on the webinar through the link, I would highly recommend you do that. One of the reasons is we've got a really nice PowerPoint, so you'll be able to see that, and we're going to ask people to submit questions via the chat box. So if you can log online, that's terrific. If today you can't, that's okay. You'll probably see in your email from yesterday is that Thomas shared a copy of the PowerPoint. Audrey's also linked a copy of the PowerPoint in the chat box if you'd like to open up that to have it along with you. For those of you who are online, if you haven't yet, and I want to say thank you to Richard and Olga and Lillian, you can tell us where you're calling in from by using the location map. It's in the lower left-hand side. All you need to do is take your mouse, grab the purple pin, and drag it to wherever you are in the world, and you can use the plus and minus symbols like a satellite map on the right-hand side to zoom in and zoom out if you want to get better accuracy. And you can see from today, so DeWitt and Audrey and I are calling in from around the DC area in the United States, and we've got Lilia calling in from Kenya. Terrific to have you with us. Lillian's actually going to be one of our presenters today. Stand with us. Great. And as others log in, if you can hear me again, this is Meredith Ferris. I'm just welcoming folks for today. We're going to get started in a little bit. We're waiting for some more folks to log in online. If you can hear me, please chat with me in the chat box to let me know if the audio quality is good for you. And if you are on the phone line, like I said, we just highly encourage that you log on to the website so that you can see the webinar firsthand and participate in the Q&A. The link was sent in previous emails, and so that is marketlinks.adobeconnect.com/Tusome1 to log into the actual website. And if you can't, please at least bring up the PowerPoint presentation so you can follow along. If you've got any questions, please submit them in the chat box. We'll be answering them. We're going to go on mute for a few more minutes just as we do some final preparations with our presentation team.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you're calling in from, and welcome. My name is Jessica Lopez, and I am the Higher Education and Youth Workforce Development Division Chief, but I previously was working in Africa Bureau and worked with the research team on the Tu-Soma case study. So this presentation will highlight the recent findings from a case study on Kenya's flagship early grade reading activity, Tu-Soma. Tu-Soma, which means let's read, was one of USAID's first and most successful experiences in the education sector of taking a piloted early grade reading program to national scale through government systems. Why was Tu-Soma so successful? The case study was designed to better understand the key elements of the program that made nationwide scale-up effective while maintaining its high quality and continuously improving reading scores. Further, it will help the agency to better understand the factors of commitment and capacity that contribute to its vision for self-reliance. The research was conducted using the lab's Long-Term Assistance and Services for Research mechanism, known as LASER. The main objective of LASER is to build the technical and research capacity of universities and researchers. In this case, the research team was comprised of Makerere University in Uganda, University of Nairobi in Kenya, Purdue University, and Catholic Relief Services. And now, the research team who's with us from Kenya and Purdue and Uganda will present their findings.
Terrific, and we want to thank you, Jessica, for that welcome. For anybody who just logged online, that was Jessica Louise Lopez with USAID Washington, and just giving the welcome, and we're delighted for any of you all that had just joined us. My name is Meredith Ferris. I'm going to be the facilitator for today, and up on your screen right now, you should see a copy of this wonderful speakers panel we have with us today. And so as Jessica was just sharing, we've got Lillian Gangla with USAID Kenya and East Africa, Justice Inyega from the University of Nairobi, Julia Sasatengo from Makerere University, Helen Inyega from University of Nairobi, Aminata Yala from the Catholic Relief Services, Betty Buguso from Purdue University, and of course you just heard from Jessica. And so I am very honored to be introducing these speakers to you all today. And to give you a preview of where we're going, we've got a pretty simple structure for today. Lillian's going to get us started, as well as with Justice, to talk about the USAID Kenya and East Africa basic education programming. So sort of taking us from the high country level down to the Tusome program. And then we're going to hear a bit on the case study background also from Lillian, the case study methodology Julius will speak to, and then the case study findings and lessons learned we'll hear from Helen, as well as Aminata about those findings and lessons learned. To wrap up, we've left a healthy amount of time for folks to have Q&A and to talk about how what you learned from this webinar might apply to your work. And so we really want you listening for the lessons learned and the findings that you can relate to the kinds of work that you're doing. And so just in terms of webinar logistics, before we switch to the background, we just wanted to give you a couple of tips for being on the webinar today. And so one of the things that we're going to ask you to do, if you haven't already, is to just please mute your speakers. Nothing like a webinar with a little bit of background noise. So we're grateful that if you muted your speakers, or please do that now. We ask that you turn off other electronics or programs. It's really tempting to look at your email or other things, and so we're just going to ask you to shut those off for now. And we're also going to ask you to make use of the chat box at the bottom left right-hand corner of your screen. That's where we're going to have discussions, ask you to ask questions as we go along. It's also a great place to tell us if you're having technical difficulties. And so my colleagues Deweet and Audrey are here today helping in case there are any audio or other kinds of issues. So please chat them, or you can also see their email addresses if for some reason getting through on the chat is not working for you. And of course, if you're just listening in by phone, I would highly recommend that you join the webinar. And if you cannot today, I would recommend that you get a copy of the PowerPoint slides. Thomas had shared those yesterday with folks joining the webinar, so you should be able to see a copy of those. And for any folks online, you can see the second post in the chat box. Audrey Everett has added a link to the Google Drive where you can also download a copy of the PowerPoint slides. All right, so without further ado, like I said, I'm delighted to introduce Justice, who's joining us. He's a professor at the University of Nairobi, and he's going to be telling us a bit about the background and the Kenya education context. What should you tell me?
Maybe I'll give about the background about the education system in Kenya. Since independence in 1963, we have had many developments in education, and we have had various commissions and various education committees on education, and these commissions have tried to improve on the quality of education in Kenya. In all these commissions and these reforms, they were focusing on how we can improve on literacy in Kenya, and more specifically on English and also Kiswahili. As you might be aware, Kiswahili and English is the official language in Kenya, and Kiswahili is the national language in Kenya. And therefore, they are very important languages that must be learned in school in Kenya. And as you might be aware, when we are talking about literacy, and we are talking about literacy across the curriculum. With these reforms, there were other major reforms that we have had in Kenya, especially in the year 2003, when we had free primary education. This had an impact in the education system because many children went to school. There are some studies that have been done in Kenya, and these studies have shown that the scores of the children in literacy have been low. And some of these studies are focused on this literacy. There are, for example, the WESO, the National Education Sector Plan, which has also incorporated this, and we also have the National Assessment Systems on Monitoring Learning Achievement. Since the quality of education has been low in terms of literacy, there was a need for us to have some interventions on how we can improve on this education. And one of these interventions that came about is the Tu-Soma project in Kenya. And with that, now I call upon my friend, my colleague, to continue with that.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Justice. And so delighted to reintroduce Lillian Gangwa. She is the Basic Education Team Leader from the Office of Education and Youth at USAID in Nairobi, Kenya. And she's worked in this area for over 2 decades. She's also, she's been really instrumental to this program, and her primary responsibility is to provide leadership and oversee the implementation of the early grade reading program in Kenya. And Lillian, we're just delighted to have you here with us today. So let me turn it over to you to share a little bit more on the background.
Thank you. So at USAID in Kenya and East Africa, we work closely with the host country government as we design and manage programs. So with the changes in the education sector and the reform around both access and quality of education, given the gap that was identified that the learners were not achieving the desired learning outcomes, USAID sat with the Kenya government and looking at both the strategic focus of developing the quality of education, we designed a pilot program that then led to the scale up. But the core message here is the co-design process and identification of needs jointly. In our programming as well, we always put the Ministry of Education at the forefront, so they take leadership. And this is usually at the highest level within the ministry, usually at the level of the minister, together with the principal secretary. So the principal secretary is the second in command at the ministry, and he supports a lot of the initiatives and interventions that USAID is doing at the technical level, and provides strategic direction and focus for his team that works closely with our team in a coordinated effort. Our team would be both USAID and whichever implementing partner we're working with on the particular project. Within our projects, we work within the government existing systems. We do not develop a parallel system. This is important as we look at the journey to self-reliance and also the sustainability of programs, so that what we provide is a lot of technical assistance as the ministry people themselves, whether it is the teachers, whether it is other staff cadre, do the actual work that they are employed to do by the Kenya government. So we come in as partners and work closely within those existing systems, despite the fact that we do not do the G2G programming in Kenya. So in 2011, we began working with the ministry on a pilot project that is the Primary Math and Reading Initiative. And in 2012, at the beginning of the school year, we did a baseline study to determine what level the learners are. This pilot was in 4 counties out of the 47 counties that are in the country. And as you can see there on the bar graph in blue, those were the students who were reaching the benchmarks. These benchmarks are set by the Ministry of Education through their semi-autonomous agency, the Kenya National Examination Council. And we began the intervention thereafter, and at the end of the school year, in October of the same year, we did a midline evaluation. And as you can see, there was a significant gain in the reading scores of the learners. And from the 8% learners who were reaching benchmark, we now had 21% of learners reaching benchmark. We continued the intervention for another year, and in 2013 we did an endline evaluation. And as you can see, the endline evaluation, at the end line, we had 43% of learners reaching benchmark, and this is in English. The results for Kiswahili are quite similar, but what is significant about this is once the ministry saw this data at midline, they already requested us to take this nationally. The country had a problem, and they saw this as a solution to that problem. So the identification of the need for a national scale-up came from the government itself. So in this photo, you see President Kenyatta, who is the current president of Kenya. This is the launch of the Tusome program. He is standing there with the Minister of Education, as well as our ambassador and the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom. And this was a significant moment for us because the primer study had shown results. The government had used evidence to make a decision to take the program nationally. And this decision was made at a very high level, at the minister level, but then briefing the president of the country and saying this is what we need for Kenya, and this is an opportunity for a reform effort within the sector so that we are not only having children coming to school, but as the children come to school, they're actually learning. In the national scale-up, we focused on the key components of the pilot that were the most effective based on the different treatment groups that we had in the pilot. So as we went to scale, we moved from 4 counties to 47 counties, which is all the counties in the country. And through the program, we have, in the 5+ years of intervention, reached 7.6 million learners. We have worked with over 75,000 teachers, to include teachers in both public schools as well as teachers in low-cost private schools, which I usually find in the informal settlements. And these were in the former 5 cities or municipalities within Kenya. We've also worked with the head teachers in each of the schools to achieve the sort of gains that we are seeing. In working through the government systems, we worked with instructional coaches called curriculum support officers. These are employees of the Teacher Service Commission, and they manage the lowest unit of schools. So it's a cluster of schools, between 15 and 20 schools within a cluster. And they go around the schools, visiting the teachers, observing lessons, and providing feedback on how the teachers are doing. And this is after the teacher training. And that particular system has been shown great uptake, and it really helped us to even identify what are some of the issues and which are areas we need to improve in. Key to this program was instructional material. And in Kenya at the time, with the increased access to school, there was a challenge of teaching and learning material. Pupils were sharing books. The pupil-teacher ratio was also relatively high. But for the teaching and learning material, we could do something about it. So we worked closely with the Kenya government through their Curriculum Institute to develop material that is appropriate for these learners and that will support their literacy development, focusing on the 5 components of reading. And these books were eventually vetted and approved following the evaluation process and are now part of the national curriculum approved teaching and learning material. We have over the years adapted and revised the material as was necessary. And in total across the school system, we have distributed approximately 26 million books to include both people's books, teachers' guides, and supplementary readers for learners on a 1-to-1 pupil book ratio, which is a first for Kenya in a very long time, and which also has had some ripple effects within the sector, which we'll talk about later. In terms of the focus of the program, in terms of the languages, we continued with English and Kiswahili, and you will see that though the pilot included a math component, our Tu-Soma program does not include the math component. We focused on the languages, and the math component was taken up by the Ministry of Education with the support from the GPE.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Lillian. And so with that, we're going to switch from the background to the methodology. And just for new folks who have logged on, we're delighted to have you with us. If you have any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat box. You can include the person's name if you want to ask somebody a specific question. But we'll be taking all of those at the end. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Julius Osuntongo. He is the program coordinator at Makerere University School of Public Health for the Resilient Africa Network. And within the Laser Pulse Consortium, he works as the network engagement officer, where he's responsible for the mobilization and expansion of the university network membership within sub-Saharan Africa. And so I'm delighted to introduce him as he tells you a little bit about the methodology behind this case study. So Julius, let me hand it to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So we took on quite a scientific methodology, and this was mainly a qualitative study. As you see, we put in a map to show the counties that we went to. These were mainly 4 out of the 47 counties in Kenya. And so we talked to counties like Isiolo and Elgeyo Marakwet that are classified as SL, that's arid and semi-arid land. Then also we spoke to people within Kakamega and also Mombasa that are classified as non-SL. And also we know that Kenya has about 80 geographical regions. So that meant that at least we had 4 of the regions represented within our case study. So within here we talked to 20 schools that we visited, and that included about 3 upbeat schools and about 3 schools that are SNE, or schools for special needs education. And so in here we had interviews with the different stakeholders, but key to note is that we had key informant interviews with the county education officers, we had key informant interviews with the ministry officials, with the sagas that Lillian alluded to earlier. But also most importantly is that we talked to RTI, that is the lead implementer for the Tu-Soma program. And also we talked to USAID Kenya and East Africa, since they designed this Tu-Soma together with the ministry officials to understand the motivations and how this was designed. So we had also focus group discussions with the learners in grade 1 and grade 3, and mainly to understand the issues around Tu-Soma and how they perceive this entire activity. We also talked to the teachers that teach these grades, grade 1 and grade 3, as well as to parents that have learners in grades 1 and grades 3, mainly to understand Tu-Soma and how it is being implemented. We also talked to youth groups because these groups were very important in terms of community entry of the Tu-Soma program. And so we talked to a couple of the youth groups within these 4 counties. And also we conducted classroom observations whereby on each day we would split ourselves into 2 teams. One team would observe a lesson being conducted in Kiswahili. Then the second sub-team would observe a lesson that is being conducted in English, again to further get more knowledge and insights on how the Tu-Soma program is being implemented within the school settings. And all this we did within the last summer, between June and July this year. And so after that, we had all these interviews audio recorded. And once we returned to Nairobi, we sat down, we transcribed them verbatim, and we had a smaller team of experts, interpret and code this data. So we used the code book, which we co-developed as a research team, and it helped us to understand the issues and insights that were emerging from the data.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Julius, for that intro. And now we're moving on to our last phase of the presentation before we get to some Q&A. And so this will be about the case study findings and the lessons learned. And so to start us off, Professor Helen Inanga, who is an associate professor in the Department of Education, Communication, and Technology at the University of Nairobi, is going to get us started. She oversees the design and development of early grade reading and numeracy instructional materials, as well as many, many other accomplishments. And so I'm delighted to turn it over to Helen, and then we'll hear from Aminata to talk a little bit about the lessons learned. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Meredith. Good morning, everyone. Good evening for the ones who are joining in. I would like to pick up from, in terms of the Tu-Soma materials, and particularly the 5 interventions that were scaled up nationally. To begin with, I will talk about the instructional materials. I'm glad Lillian has already laid the framework for me to discuss it, makes it much easier. So in terms of the instructional materials, there were high quality instructional materials that were prepared in conjunction with teachers on the ground. They were prepared in such a way that now the Ministry of Education was able to have a 1-to-1 textbook pupil ratio achieved. As Lillian rightly said, that is something that had never been done in Kenya before. It was a first. And secondly, these materials were in the 2 languages, in English and Kiswahili. Something else that was unique about the program is that the materials were actually adapted for learners with special needs. So those with visual impairment and those with hearing impairment were able to benefit from these books, the adapted books. Another important thing is that many private schools in Kenya wondered what was happening in the public schools, why the students seemed to be latching on to reading very quickly. And so many of them would actually get the books and photocopy them. But the Ministry of Education and USAID had another partnership fund that together they were able to develop the books that then went into local private schools, as had been said earlier by Lillian. In terms of teacher professional development, the teachers were receiving, and they continue to receive, termly trainings that last about 5 days. But the unique thing about each subsequent training is that it would actually focus on some of the emerging needs. As the teachers rolled out the program in the classroom, you'd find they only focus on the emerging needs. Another important aspect of the professional teacher development was the issue of curriculum support officers. In the past, we had these officers in place, the system was in place, but the curriculum support officers were underutilized. But within the Tu-Soma program, in fact, the name had to change. It used to be Teacher Advisory Center Tutors. They got a new name called Curriculum Support Officers. They came in to mentor, to support, and to provide coaching to the teachers. We think that was the game changer in the Tu-Soma program, unlike other programs before, because the teachers were actually, they felt more supported. Each time we talked to the teacher, they felt supported. So in terms of instructional support and supervision, that was very well done and scaled up in the Tu-Soma program. Whenever we talked to the teachers, and in fact, in some of the schools that we went to, we had opportunities to see the curriculum support officer in action, actually supporting the teachers. And the teachers appreciated the support they received from the curriculum support officers. These curriculum support officers had ICT equipment that they used to support the teachers. For example, the tablets the curriculum support officers had videos on them, and we also had a sound Pictionary, which then, if the teacher was struggling with a particular sound or they were struggling with a particular strategy, the curriculum support officer would actually walk the teacher step by step. Maybe they would watch the video together. So that was actually the game changer in terms of using the curriculum support officer system. In terms of the results, when you look at the results in Tu-Soma, what you see on your screen is the English findings, and they only focus on the baseline and midline. The end line was just done, I think, about 2 months ago, so I'm sure they are actually analyzing the data. But the beautiful thing about the Tu-Soma program, if you just focus, for example, on the red color, that one represents 0 readers. At the beginning of the Tu-Soma program, we had some students at that time who were not able to read. Remember initially when Lillian said they had only focused on 4 counties. Now when the program was scaled up to 47 counties, we had another set of non-readers. So in English, there were about 53% who could not read at all a word in English. But by midline for class 1, that number had actually gone down by about half. That was very impressive. The same could be said for class 2. We had about 38% who were non-readers. And as you can see, when we had fewer non-readers, it basically meant we had more students who are reading. So you could see differences in terms of the percentages for the learners who are beginning to read, the learners who are emergent readers, and the learners who are actually becoming fluent. So like in class 2, seeing about 37% up from 12%. And in Kiswahili, you could see similar improvements, but the unique thing about Kiswahili is that we actually had 70% of learners who are non-readers. Bear in mind that Kiswahili has a different linguistic system. We call it an agglutinated language. This really means that you find we have longer words because they combine, for example, the tense marker, the person marker, and the verb. And I like to give the silly example of a statement in English about love. I love you. Those are 3 short words in English. But in Swahili, nakupenda, or you could say ni nakupenda. So you find for Kiswahili is only 1 very long word, while in English there will be 3 words. So that in part explains why many students may have had trouble reading the Kiswahili, never mind that it was the language they would be more familiar than English. But the beauty with the Tu-Soma program is that actually that number was brought down to about 45%, which was very impressive for class 1 and the same for class 2. So we've seen shifts in terms of learners improving in their performance in that regard. Now, in terms of the success of the Tu-Soma, I would like to point out several very important steps that actually have made it to be successful. So, for example, the Tu-Soma program was aligned very closely with the policy within the country, just as earlier Ron talked about the National Education Sector Plan. This is an important legal document guiding the education system within the country. So they were able to align the Tu-Soma program to existing policy. A new policy was put in place and launched just about maybe 3 weeks ago that will guide the education system between 2018 to 2022. So that alignment was also another winning way for the Tu-Soma program. Secondly, the strategic planning and intervention and integration of the program. First and foremost, when Tu-Soma came into place, the Ministry of Education put together the National Technical Team. This technical team was comprised of different agencies within the education sector. So for example, in terms of curriculum development, we had the agency coming on board. They had a representative, National Examination Council, and then the Special Education Institute. These 3 key partners were brought on board, and they began working hand in hand with the government of the Tu-Soma program. And that was very important actually for sustainability. And in terms of the core elements of the Tu-Soma program, they were integrated in all the planning activities, both at the national level and at the county level. they were able to sit together, undertake what we call the joint work planning, both at the national and the county level. And then, of course, they engaged all the relevant key stakeholders. You saw the president himself officially launching the Tu-Soma program that spoke very highly of the political goodwill within the country around Tu-Soma. And the other issue I would like to mention is the capacity strengthening that happened within the Tu-Soma program, the regular in-service program that had never been done to that extent before, the game changer that I talked about in terms of curriculum support officers working very closely with the teachers, and then of course, equally important is the focus on the pre-service teacher education system. Many programs that come into the country only focus on pre-service, on in-service, which is a good thing, but Tu-Soma also incorporated the new teachers coming into the teaching profession. In terms of the journey to self-reliance, this was really important for the Tu-Soma program, and it was roped in right from the beginning at design level. There was a very solid plan to integrate the Tu-Soma program within existing programming. So in the design, it was very clear that the government was going to take over. When we went to collect data, we actually realized that the government had taken ownership, particularly of printing books for class 1, and the teacher training, the government was taking on more ownership, though they were working hand in hand. Most of the core activities are being done together with the government now taking on more responsibility, like the development I've mentioned about distribution of books, the capacity building, the issue of the curriculum support officer becoming important again because now they have a job description. Now they are answerable to the Teacher Service Commission, and that speaks to the fact that now they can continue, they have a job description to support the teachers going forward beyond the project life. In terms of transitioning to the government, RTI, which was the implementer of the program, now is just providing technical support. The Ministry of Education has taken on more leadership in that regard. And then the planning that is happening at the various levels, at the national level and the county government, having joint work plans for the year that is being done, that has added to it. And lastly, in terms of the budgetary allocation, now we have money set aside. In Kenya, as just as said earlier on, we are implementing a competency-based curriculum, and Tu-Soma has been integrated as part of the early years education program within the competency-based curriculum. So there is already budgetary allocation for it that has gone to this program. Thank you very much.
Okay, this is Aminato at CRS, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the lessons learned from this project. So this case study was really surrounded around answering 3 questions. How was the Kenyan government able to scale, gain the necessary commitment, and capacity, build it to transition this program to national government? And the case study brought around a lot of lessons learned as it relates to this. When we look at scale, we learned about the process of a gradual release to system-level ownership. This was important because this Tu-Soma program was done in a phased approach. This prevented duplication and also allowed opportunities for course correction. We learned the importance of planning for contextual differences and vulnerable groups. That planning allowed us to make plans and provisions for special needs education. It also allowed for mapping out the needs that were unique for several regions, so the arid, semi-arid lands, as well as communities that were in low-income, low-fee private schools. We also learned the importance of institutionalizing core components within existing systems. This was done primarily with CSO officers. They were ministry-level staff, and in this program, they were taken up to do coaching. The government allowed this to happen by adding more administrative support at the ministry level, so it provides space for them to go visit schools on a continuous basis. As it relates to building commitment for this transition, we learned the importance of ensuring alignment with national policy and programmatic needs. This was done primarily with taking inventory of the textbook policies and ensuring the necessary alignment to make sure that the distribution and allocation for instructional materials was able to be done in an efficient way.
We learned the importance of gaining commitment and buy-in with key stakeholders early on. The teachers' education institutions were engaged at the pre-service level, and also civil society such as youth groups were engaged to promote the program with families and communities. And we learned the importance of promoting systems for accountability and transparency. This was done in many ways. One of the most notable ways was through using data that was collected by CSO's officers during the classroom visits. This data was used by the ICT tablets during small, basically early grade reading assessments with students, and the data was uploaded and shared with ministry staff. This provided accountability and transparency in many ways, including letting the ministry staff know how often and when CSO officers were visiting schools, but also it provided them data on how students were performing in the various counties. As it relates to capacity, we learned the importance of continuous professional development and how strategic it was in ensuring that the key staff who were implementing this project were able to do their work effectively. This was done at the pre-service level, this was done through teacher coaching, but also through regular and customized refresher training based on needs. And finally, we learned the importance of leveraging ICT for data-driven evidence-based instruction. So as I mentioned before, CSO's officers visited the classrooms. They would watch the teachers teach and take a sample of students and perform small early grade reading assessments. They would meet with the teachers to talk about how the students were performing and also provide suggestions to coach them on how to adapt their instruction to better meet the needs of those individual students.
Thank you so much, Aminata. And just, I know for the team here, there's so many folks who have worked on this, and so we just wanted to include a bit on the acknowledgments of all the folks who made Tu-Soma possible and certainly put a lot of effort into today. So many thanks to USAID, RTI, University of Nairobi, Makerere University, Catholic Service, Purdue University, Laser Pulse, and Training Resources Group. And thank you very much to all of our presenters. And so, as promised, we're going to switch over now to do some Q&A. And so if you do have questions, we ask you to share them in the chat box. We're actually going to start off, we did get a question from Richard, and so I hope you'll all take a few minutes to type in some ideas on your questions. And for our research team and others in DC, if there's any additional points or things that you all had wanted to share, that might be a good time for this too after we answer a few of the questions if we have time. So for folks who are on the webinar, I want to give you just a minute to put in any questions. And if you don't have any questions, if you just have some feedback on the case study, some kudos for the group that's presented, we'd welcome those as well. Terrific. And Enoch, thank you very much for submitting your question as well. That's terrific. And so Q&A is open, so please enter your questions in Q&A. To start off with a question from Richard, and this one we're going to start with Lillian, and if others would like to chime in, we can hear them too. Richard asked, were Tu-Soma students taught in English and Kiswahili, or were some students in some counties schools taught in English and other students in other counties and schools taught in Kiswahili? If the latter, how was the distinction made? And so, Lillian, let me give you some space to respond to that question for Richard.
Thank you. So, in the Kenya education system, there are some subjects that are compulsory and some that are optional. But in the early grades, all the subjects are compulsory. So both English and Kiswahili are compulsory learning areas within the curriculum, and therefore all learners have to do them. So in the Tusome program, we did have both English and Kiswahili being offered to learners because they're required to learn both languages concurrently. As they move to upper grades, English then becomes the medium of instruction, but Kiswahili continues to be taught as a language. And in the final primary school year, both languages are assessed, and even in secondary school. So for both the Tusome and the earlier pilot program, we did have an intervention in English and in Kiswahili.
Excellent. Thank you, Lillian. Richard, does that answer your question? Okay, so I see the follow-up. So he said, so during the Tu-Soma activity, Kiswahili was the language of instruction while English was a subject?
No, they were both subjects and English is the language of instruction.
Okay.
Meredith, I would like to also respond to the question.
Okay. Perfect.
Yes,
thank you. And Ellen?
Lillian has rightly said that both English and Kiswahili were learned and are being learned in the Tusome program. But at the beginning, in terms of teaching class 1, we had begun by teaching learners reading and writing in Kiswahili while building their oral skills in English. So English was actually first in a bit later on, like at the end of one term, just to give them enough time to acquire enough vocabulary for them to engage in English. Kenya being a multilingual country with over 42 languages, so some learners were coming from home with no proficiency in English, so they were given an opportunity. In the real world, in the ideal world, we would have held off one subject, but this was not the case, and maybe it's one of the lessons class that we could actually pick up from. But both languages were taught, as Lillian has rightly said. And I know Richard asked whether it was a language of instruction. No. So English and Kiswahili were both taught as subjects, but when you move away from the city center, they could use other languages like other mother tongues as the languages of instruction, but they would still have to do English and Kiswahili as subjects.
Terrific. Thank you for that addition. So, and I see some other good things. Great. Richard, thank you for confirming that answers your question. And so Eva has asked a couple of questions, and so let me just read the 3 questions out loud, and we'll get some responses to these. So the first question was, I'd like to know more about the approaches that Tusome took in inclusivity, especially building content and engaging schools or communities of children with disabilities. The second question is, how did the activity work around the education sectoral challenges like teacher motivation, large class sizes, and et cetera? And the last question is about specific ways in which Tusome collaborated with other USA Technical offices and any other local government entities apart from the Ministry of Education. So 3 wonderful questions. Thank you for embedding those. And so let me turn to the research team in terms of who might like to say a few words about the approaches that Tusome took in inclusivity, especially building content and engaging schools or communities of children with disabilities.
Maybe I could take that as well. This is Helen.
Great. Thank you, Helen.
Yes, so we already pointed out earlier that the instructional materials were adapted for learners with special needs. So, but only 2 types of special needs. So we had learners with we have learners with visual impairment and learners with hearing impairment taken care of. But we are aware there are other disabilities that the program did not address. It wasn't part of their mandate. In fact, the adaptation with SNE was actually one of the course corrections that Tusome had to undertake. But in terms of, so first and foremost, the materials had to be adapted. And when it came to the capacity building of the teachers, the curriculum support officers that were hired were the ones actually proficient in the handling of learners with special needs. They needed to have had training and experience for learners with special needs. So in this case, they followed the teachers into the classrooms and provided more closely monitored support within the classrooms for learners with special needs and teachers working in those classrooms. So the CSOs, the curriculum support officers, were specially selected to be able to work with these kinds of teachers to build their capacity, to encourage them, and etc. Maybe my colleagues can speak to the other issues of teacher motivation and collaboration with Ministry of Education.
This is Jessica. I'll let others speak as well, but I did participate in the data collection, just that I listened in on the interviews. So just a thought about the motivation that I thought was interesting was the curriculum. One of the things that happened when that change from primer to Tu-Soma and a lesson learned along the way was the role of the curriculum support officer, who had previously been called a TAC tutor, had changed. And so it went from more of an inspector type of relationship to a support and motivation relationship. And so I heard that a lot in the interviews, both with the curriculum support officers and the teachers, that they saw their role as being the CSO said, our role here is to motivate the teachers, to support them where they need that. And teachers also said that they felt that. They in interviews with just teachers, they talked about the role that the CSO officers had with them and how it encouraged motivation. And I'll open up to others, or Lillian, or
yes,
Julius.
This is Julius. I can add to that in a way that they were also motivated by these frequent visits by the CSOs. But also most importantly, what they said is that, and this could be done, that if they can provide like some bit of certification, like if you undertake the Tu-Soma training, but also some bit of awards, recognition, like on some celebrations, as teachers that are making a difference in the communities. I think that would also motivate them a little bit further. But when it comes to the classroom sizes, these actually kept swelling because of the Tu-Soma, as we saw learners moving from the private schools into the public schools. But the teachers tried to, to innovate around that. Like the sitting arrangement somehow changed in a way that they would sit like in some bit of circles where the desks were facing each other. But I think there's still a lot more that needs to be done in terms of these increasing class sizes moving forward.
Yeah, this is Justice. I'll say that the teachers were motivated in the sense that they were involved in every stage of this Tu-Soma project, and all the stakeholders were involved in this project, and therefore the teachers were able to see the benefits of the Tu-Soma project, and they were able to implement them in the classes that they were handling.
Terrific. Thank you, Jessica, Julius, and Justice for those inputs, especially on the teacher motivation. And just in terms of the last question on specific ways in which Tu-Soma collaborate with other USA technical offices, local government entities apart from the Ministry of Education, I think, Lillian, you might have had a few comments on this one.
Thank you. Internally at USAID, we collaborated with the Democracy and Governance Office, in which they helped us to work with the governance structures within the education sector in Kenya. So we have 47 counties, and each county has a county education board. But this is a new governance structure that previously did not exist. And as they came into being, there was need to build their capacity around education oversight and management within the sector. So that was an entry point with the governance office. And then we scaled this across various counties at school level, in which we worked with the boards of management of schools, previously referred to as the school management committees. And here, these were also a new creation. Previously, what we had in the schools was a Parents Teachers Association, but now these two had been separated. We had a board of management and we had a Parents Association. And the composition of the boards of management is defined in the Basic Education Act, and it is very different from what previously existed. And therefore, there was need to build their capacity around school governance and also project oversight. And so the link there was between their role and overseeing programs such as Tu-Soma, and also as part of that, we referred to other projects such as the early grade math project, which is funded by the GPE, as well as what the government of Kenya was running, which is a digital literacy program where they're providing laptops to schools. So we had a close collaboration between the education office, the governance office, as well as both our implementing partners to develop material for this type of training jointly with the Ministry of Education, and to be able to have those trainings at the school level and at the county level. In addition, 2 years after the training, we went back to do an evaluation of what impact this training had for these particular education managers, and we have those results which can be shared in a different platform. Other areas of collaboration was within what at the mission we call the PREG group, which is a partnership for resilience and economic growth, which works mostly in the ASAL, the arid and semi-arid areas. And Tu-Soma project was part of this ASAL collaboration, where we are focusing on various interventions that target these particular areas, to include food security, issues around water, issues around CVE, and so on. And there was joint work planning sessions organized, and so in those particular regions there was a lot of focus on more on a broader way of implementing as USAID, as opposed to just focusing on our technical specializations. Much as we have 47 counties, education at the basic level, which is from grade 1 to grade 12, is not devolved. It remains a national function. So we work more closely with the Ministry of Education, but they have local representation in every county in the form of a county director of education, and this is both for the Ministry of Education as well as the Teachers Service Commission staff. So as we worked much as the national level, they had county level representation, and those were the entities we mainly engaged. We also, as mentioned earlier, worked with the youth groups who were in specific counties, working within specific villages.
Thank you, Lillian. Thank you very much. And actually, just to add one little thing to what Lillian said, when we heard the report backs from the enumerators who were collecting the data, doing the interviews, a big thing that came out was trust. And they, you heard that the enumerator said Tu-Soma built trust in a meaningful way with all stakeholders, and from the very beginning, at all levels, with all different stakeholders, and from the very beginning, and that this really helped with the sustainability of Tu-Soma. So thank you for that. And I also, I know we're coming close to time, or we're at time, so I wanted to first thank our presenters from, Makerere, from University of Nairobi, and from Purdue and CRS for all their work on this case study. I'd also like to thank USAID Kenya, and specifically Wick Powers and Lillian Gangla for her superior support and expertise to the research team. And I'd like to thank Africa Bureau and Thomas Rosenfeld for their support in this research as well, and also to TRG for the help with the webinar. And thank you to all who have joined us today, and for your questions and your interest. We very much appreciate it. We will follow up with a link to the recording of the webinar. The report is being finalized, but will be available in the next few weeks. We will be posting it on EduLinks, but we can also send it out in an email. And on the invite, you have a link to the briefer, as well as the desk review, which is actually very good. An initial literature review was done for this before the data collection, and there is a link to the desk review on the invite. So if you have questions, please contact Thomas Rosenfeld, who will be following up with an email, and we look forward to your further engagement, and thank you again to all for your support and the work you've done and your participation today.
Terrific. So that will wrap up our webinar for today. If you've got any final messages or you've got thoughts on this final chat box reflection question about what did you learn from the Tu-Soma case and how it might apply to your work, we would really appreciate it. And just thank you all again for your time, especially our presenting team. We'll leave the webinar open for a few final minutes if there's any final comments or questions that come in. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day.